Let's start with the very origin of death. Because if we have to understand anything, instead of just trying to look at the phenomena and trying to understand the phenomena, we need to go back to the origin, and that reveals a lot. And this origin of things is ultimately, at the end of it, a matter of inner experience. We may use the word occult experience, spiritual experience. But this spiritual experience has been given to us in terms of metaphysical thought for the mind to grasp, or in terms of stories for the heart to cherish. So let me start with two small little stories about the origin of death as given in Indian mythology. One of the story is that death has a son, the Lord God of truth and light, effulgence, has a wife called Sangyana. Literally means an all-comprehending consciousness. Obviously, we can connect it to the supramental truth. But it so happens that at a point of time, because of such a tremendous heat, light, tremendous pressure, she goes for a few days and replaces herself with a sister called Chaya, which means shadow. So now, the Lord of Truth has two wives. One is who is intimate, all-comprehending consciousness, and the second one who is Chaya. Chaya is shadow, which imitates his wife. So that's how out of Chaya, shadow, and sun, out of the play of light and dark, there is born this strange being who is and who is not, and that is called death. So he is known initially as Yama. Yama literally means the restrainer. So there are two laws that begin to operate from that moment onwards. It's a way of saying, one is the law of truth, the law of sun. And we here can connect very easily to that. This is the law of truth which we have been the ones to express in our lives. Because if the law of truth operates, then we escape the law of death. The second is the law of death. And the law of death is to restrain. Yama literally means, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Yama, Niyama. So it restrains the free flight towards infinity. Now this is not without a purpose, because if we look at the sunlight, the way it emerges and reaches to the earth, we'll see that the pressure, the gravity, the force is so intense that hardly a photon or two escapes from there. That is enough, that little stream, to light up our universe, little universe. So for a real creation in terms of multiplicity to be, there was a need to put a kind of veil. And whatever is behind the veil or below the veil, it grows under the law of death until it is ready for the full blaze of the truth. So the law of death operates as a shadow to help us slowly take little baby steps. We are having this wonderful, everything teaches us, so whether to have the talk here or outside. And as you said, it's very hot outside, so we have the talk here. Now you see, this is the choice. Outside is beautiful, but it's very hot. This is also beautiful, but that is something amazing, So something similar happens in our life, that we have a two-stage progress. One, a long time when we are under the grip of death and darkness and ignorance, and then the law of death operates. So what is the law? It's a restrainer. It doesn't allow us to go beyond the point. That is how it operates. You take the law of karma, take any which way. Ultimately, it means you can't go beyond a point. You may be born with the greatest of aspirations. Every child, I believe, is born with something beautiful. We may call it an ideal, because in the mind it comes as an ideal of love, of beauty, of light, of freedom, of truth, of bliss, peace. This fellow says, no, I'll limit it. So it limits, and therefore beyond a point we cannot go. So there are two kinds of humanity, one which is content within that limit. It says, let's make the most of what yet we may spend until and to the dust we descend. Omar Khayyam's quoting him. Sans wine, sans singer, sans song, sans end. So this one kind of we human creatures who are content with the law of death, and within this framework they operate. and they want to make the most of what is possible within it. But there is another kind, the rebel in the true sense. They want to go beyond the frames. And I suppose everybody gathered here in some way wants to go beyond the frame. So limitless, not just abundance. There is a difference between the two. Limitless love, limitless knowledge, limitless truth without error, limitless bliss. We are meant for that. We are born for that. Limitless peace, not dependent on any external condition. So this is a dream we are born with. And at any given point of time, these two are acting simultaneously upon every human creature. And a time comes when we are more conscious of this or more conscious of that. When we are more conscious of that limitlessness towards which we want to go, then yoga begins. When we are not conscious of that, then it is a subconscious yoga going on. Now this conflict which is going on within us, on one side, the law of truth, Surya, pulling us. On the other side, the law of death, Yama, restraining us, rooting us, serves a purpose, paradoxically. Everything in this creation serves a purpose. On one side, it roots us from too premature a flight. If we take too premature a flight, it's like traditional yoga, where one of the great poets, mystic poets, saints, Kabir says that the pot is broken and the water has escaped. This is one kind of understanding about mystic truth, that, pot is the body, the vessel, the mind, life. Let it break, the soul should escape. But there is another truth that no, the soul has not come to escape. It has come to change these very things. So now there are parts within us which respond to the law of truth, and the one part which is directly tuned is the soul, the psychic being. And because it is so tuned directly to the law of truth, it knows it. That's why in Savitri it is called Satyavan. It knows the truth. So it cannot die. You may burn it, you may bury it, it refuses to die. And it carries the dream imprints of the future, so the dream refuses to die. We come back in new bodies, new minds, new life, but the dream doesn't die. It carries forward wherever we have finished, like an essence kept inside. That's the whole purpose of rebirth. We come back with the dream, we go back with a still greater gusto. We die 1,000,000 times and we rise from the grave and the pyre 1,000,001 times. That's what life is about. And it applies in a mini way in one lifetime also. So many times we face different kinds of death. Haven't we seen a dream which collapses? Every youngster faces some kind of dream, whether it be dream of a career, job, relationship. Relationship is so common. So people come through and they go through a lot of pain. But pain is temporary, the dream is permanent. When they are going through the pain, sometimes they feel like life is not worth living. I am crestfallen. But what happens after some time? The dream bounces back. And if they have learned how to wait, the dream will return. Again there is a crash. Again it returns. The dream refuses to die. So, and all human life is ultimately not to give up, but to build eternity with transient things. That's what Sri Aurobindo beautifully says. To tune our steps in time to the rhythms of the eternal. This is what life is about. To mate the finite with the infinite. Meaning thereby not to escape into the infinite, but let infinity flow into the finite form. This is the whole secret of death. But death tries to delay, and it will only slowly, step by step. You apply an effort which looks like you will take 100-step leap, but halfway through, like the story of Daedalus and Icarus, it will make us fall. See, flying began then. Then Da Vinci and of course, the Wright brothers, and today we have entered in there. But yet humanity advances, so we should not forget that. So the great lesson of death is it teaches us to persevere, to be patient, to try the better way, the right way. So this is the secret of death, that it comes to, on one side, not delay. Delay, it looks like delay, but to take everything and everybody along. So mother gives a very nice little example. She says, supposing you are going, a family is going on the, on the road, is going somewhere. I don't know, people may have witnessed ancient, old-time Indian families with 4 or 5 kids. So, the father is in front, the mother is holding a baby, And there are 4 or 5 here, there. Sometimes you don't know where is the child. So we are all, within us we carry multitudes. And a part of us is forging ahead. The soul within us. It's the real, it has the original dream. So it is forging ahead. And haven't we noticed, is a very common observation, and the mother says, yes, it's so true, that when we are in a state of great aspiration, we think, we are right there at the doors, knocking, and now it's about to open, and we are so wonderful, and we just come out and we say, I had a beautiful meditation, so nice it is, and in the evening, the door seems to be closed forever as if. Isn't it common experience? When you are in a state of intense aspiration, you suddenly see somebody has spoiled sport, has clipped the wings or held us back, tied our legs and said, no, you be here. Because we have forgotten something. The whole idea of rebirth and the journey is that we have forgotten something. There is a baby out there within us crying for toys. And we didn't care about the baby. We were just, I want the divine. So, but the baby who wants toys says, I don't know about divine. I want that little toy. So what do? You can't go like that. You have to tell the baby, okay, give him a toy. He's not ready to fly the aircraft. You have to carry along. And the baby takes a toy. After some time it says, no, I want something better, something true. Then at one point he says, okay, now I understand, these are all toys, they will break. There is something more true, more lasting. So in us also, at any given point of time, these are the forces which are acting. One which wants the truth and truth alone and nothing but the truth. That's how we take oath in the place where there are liars, This is a little one from Sri Aurobindo when he was told about lawyers, lawyers, those who fight a case on behalf of not truth but on your behalf. They're supposed to bring out the truth. And so Sri Aurobindo says, yes, in Punjab they all call them liars. That's how you sometimes pronounce the word lawyer as liar. That's how. So he says liars. So, there is in us a part which is response to the truth, and that is in the beginning when you take the oath. I will speak whatever I speak in the name of the Gita or the Bible or the Quran or my God or whatever secular. I will speak the truth. And that's the end of the truth. After that, everything else that carries on is a lie in the name of that truth. So within us there is a part, but however small, which responds to truth. And the beauty of, the spiritual thought and the fact of experience of life. If we look across through centuries, not a little brief lifetime, look across through centuries, the truth is that though this part which opens to the truth may be a momentary thing, yet the eternal truth is that Satyameva Jayate Nanritam, Satyena Pantha Vitato Devyana. It is truth that have the last word. So this is the hope that mankind nurtures within it. That's why it comes back. The whole idea of rebirth is that. Otherwise, rebirth has no meaning if it's all about, good and bad deeds and judgment and punishment and reward. God is not a CEO with a carrot dangling in one hand and a rod in another, sitting with a nice bearded smile and saying, you creatures, condemned to hell. Obviously, such a God is not worth praying to also. So, he is constantly wanting to change us into that light of truth to which we belong. So we are at once double birth, a part within us responding to truth, and many things which do not respond. Not only do not respond, they close, go inside the little hole, and they don't want to, they resist. So how do we deal with these things? That's where the secret of death. The more we ascend to these parts which are inside the hole, more we are being pulled towards death. There is something which we as scientists, medical doctors recognize. It's called as faith and will to be. Now, we talk about corona and all that, I wish people made a study, but otherwise there are studies which have been done that who dies and who lives. One of the most important factor is will to be. I remember long back when, unfortunately, I was attending on a case which had, a case of self-harm. The child had got badly burnt. Child means a grown-up girl. And I asked the doctors, I'm myself a doctor. I said, what do you think are the chances? Like hanging. Says it'll depend upon her will to be, the specialist doctor. And it's so true. So what is important, step one is, which side is our will to be? And this will to be is so important When Sri Aurobindo speaks of the descent into night, where, is the domain of death, he says, a fifth columnist murmurs defeat. You know what's the fifth columnist when you go in a war? The fifth columnist, the first columnist is the warriors. They want to fight, eyeball to eyeball contact, and they love the battle and the victory. They don't mind falling on the ground but fighting. But fifth columnist are those that carry the rations, etc. They are afraid of the bullet, so they keep saying, "Sir, why do you want to fight? Why don't, let's go back, let's go back." So within us we have a part which murmurs against faith, full of disbelief. Mother speaks of it. She says, my struggle with death is mainly the suggestions that come from every side. And she says it's almost cruel. All the time I get suggestions. Oh, Sri Aurobindo left his body. How are you going to succeed? How is it possible? She says, then I have to fight against it. And then she says, this yoga is not for the weak. You must have the consciousness of the warrior who is willing to go right up to the end and beyond. If we are not ready to go right up to the end, we can't go to the beyond. It's a basic logic. Right up to the den, the fight will be carried right up to there. In the jaws of death, there is the secret of immortality. That's why, we have asadoma sadgamya, tamasoma jyotirgamya, mrityorma amritam gamya. What is it? It's not from death to immortality, one way to look at it, but that immortality which is hiding in the cape of death. Mrityorma amritam gamya. So that's where the secret of immortality is to be found. And how it is to be found? That's where these parts within us, which are not accepting the law of truth, they are the other kind of rebels. They want to be away from the effulgence of truth. And how do they act? Doubt. Oh, this truth and all is, there are some crazy people who go to some ashramas or who start believing in crazy things. Real life is here. Eat, drink, and be merry. Enjoy until you are enjoyed by life or death. This is doubt. God doesn't exist, it's a hallucination, malady of the mind, thyroid gone wrong, or maybe you should get your blood sugar checked up, that's why you're talking of God. So this is the doubt, disbelief, depression, distrust, despair. All these are agents of death. Yamadut. They are not like coming with these kind of creatures. They are those which sow into us the seeds of impossibility. And yet the impossibilities of today are possibilities of the future. It's not important whether in a particular lifetime we conquer over death in all the domains or not. What is important is if we go down, may we go down fighting like a warrior. Not like somebody who has given such marvelous lines in Savitri. She refused to give consent to that. That's the kind of spirit that is needed to conquer death. Yet death comes, it comes into life. And when it comes, how do we deal with it? Not with the eye of the defeatist, that all is lost, all is never lost. Because there is something which refuses defeat. As I said, which rises from the pyre and the grave. That's why the famous lines of the Gita, on one side we talk about anityam asukham lokam, that's about the world. But what about the soul? Nenam chiddanti shastrani nenam dahati pavakam. The fire burn it not, the weapons cannot leave it, the waters cannot drown it, and the air cannot dry it. Meaning thereby it is beyond the 4-5 elements. It belongs to that domain. Even if you destroy all the elements with which the warp and woof of creation is made, yet it will survive. It will survive defeat. It will survive death. So this is how we should treat the departed. Not as somebody who is, there's a very interesting tradition, I'm sure it's everywhere in different ways, but I am talking of the context from which, because I had this question that when there is somebody who has died, why do we go and do pranam? He's gone. So purely materialistic view is there is no more. You may do it for social reasons. Because there is always a social reason. So, it doesn't look nice, everybody is around. It's a kind of last respect. But whom are you giving respect if he is gone? Or if you take a traditional spiritual view, he is gone. The moment there is death, all is gone. So why are you doing pranam? So somebody like, there are crazy people like me who want to question everything and want to know the reason. I won't do it just because everybody says so. So the reason is twofold. One is that this is the body which someone inhabited for so many years and took the challenge of death. It doesn't matter, won or lost. The dreams of today are realities of tomorrow, not yet immediately. Like I said, the dream of flying, seen by Daedalus and Icarus and the author of the Pushpak Viman, Valmiki Ramayana, or in our more recent times, few hundred years before, by Da Vinci, ultimately got manifested. And the spacecraft could free itself from the gravity field. So this is each body is a challenge. Every time we take a birth, every time an avatar comes, he comes to take the challenge of the law of death. See, the story goes like there's an opponent, the eternal opponent, whether it takes the form of Ravana or Kansa. But who are they? They are the great deniers. So there is the challenge of death. But the challenge of death has to be taken for the challenge of the future. That's why death is a sphinx with two heads. You know the story of the sphinx. He's a symbol of death and immortal life. Same. So she asks a question. If you answer the question, Sri Aurobindo puts it beautifully in his poem, A Vision of Science, where religion as it is receding tells science, thou who thinkest term and end for thee are not. Though thy pride is great, thou hast forgot the sphinx that waits for thee beside the way. All questions thou mayest answer, but one day her questions shall await thee. That reply for they who cannot die. She slays them, and their mangled bodies lie upon the highways of eternity. Therefore, if thou wouldst live, answer first this one thing: who art thou in this dungeon laboring? So, first thing necessary to escape the law of death is to recover and discover that part, Satyavan, who is in any case free from the law of death. There is within us. That is the psychic being. That little Antaha Sharire Jyotirmayo Hi Shubhro, that little luminous. But since he knows the toil of mind and body and life, as a mother knows and shares her children's lives, she puts forth a small portion of herself, a being no bigger than the thumb of man, to face the pang and to forget the bliss. This in us is the Godhead, small and marred. I believe there was a dance program, drama on Nachiketa in Auroville yesterday. That's what I was told by Fabian, and today also. So that's the story. There is something which death cannot destroy. Let's find that. That is the Parasmani, the philosopher's stone, the touchstone. And if we find that, then the first escape from the law of death. And see, death helps us towards that. It is because there is death, men seek immortality. But they seek it, the worst or the lowest form is through my child. That's how, death has something to do with the reproduction, the sexual energy with the new creation. You turn it downward, you have a baby who will continue your lineage, Santan. Turn it upwards, it's not a baby, but you discover the divine baby within you. So these are the two options. Turn it downwards and outwards, it's a little baby in which all our energies go. Turn it inwards, and you discover the eternal child of the Divine Mother within us. So this is the first conquest over death. Without it, all scientific way, this way will remain a dream. Having discovered that, now we start, each part begins to escape the law of death. One of the first is mind. Why? Because matter is so close to the inconscient root of things. The last thing that changes. But the mind, in the process of hierarchy, is much higher. Mind many times has a tendency to escape the law of death. That's why people mentally can immortalize a work of art or authors who write things which carry on for ages. The mind has this ability to escape the law of death. It can enter into endless space. So if we inspire the mind with thoughts which are luminous and upturned toward the sun, so we at least one more layer which is conquered. Step by step, the battle. Then comes the heart and the vital. Very difficult fellows. They know, they want immortality, but they also want all their life with fun and party and games and everything. So you have to play with them. They don't listen to the mind. discipline the vital, it will shut down. You allow it to come and bring into it that little chip. So let it not be love which is just normal, usual love. That Shelley's poem, I cannot give you what men call love. But the love which is an adoration. Let love turn into an adoration, a seeking for a ideal state, perfect state. That's what happens with every love story, starts like that. It crash lands, that's a different thing, because Messer's death is waiting. So the heart begins to get purified. When one wants the truth of the soul in the bodily life, in the emotional life, then heart begins to change. It is also one. Now one more creature on the side of sun. Then the lower impulses turn towards food, sexuality, normal job, ambition. Tell them there is something much greater, much higher, much more beautiful, more refined energy. Instead of drawing that energy, lower energy, draw much more purer forms of energy. So slowly, this also fellow realizes that is so much better. I can remain energetic throughout the day. So the vital, once it tastes the lower vital, there is a much better energy by opening to the universal vital, and ultimately through spiritual aspiration to the divine. The simplest way is by divine service and divine work, the lower vital begins to change. And then finally on the body. The most difficult part to be convinced, because it's so obscure, the cells don't even know all this. And so every time, so illness is a means. When we go through difficult phases of the body, why illness? Pain. We all experience some time or the other. This pain, which is a roga, can become a yoga by using this pain as a means to open to the divine consciousness, to the divine light. A little story I remember, I love to recount it, of Jugalda. With that we can stop. So, he was wincing with pain for 15 days, and people noticed, asked Jugalda, what's happening? He was the registrar of the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education at one point of time. So they asked him that, why are you walking like this? And he said, no, I have a bad corn. So he said, why don't you get it operated? He said, don't say that. I was for a long time thinking of calling Ma all the time, but I won't remember. Now this, every time I press, I call Ma. Now this is not the perfect way that we have to go through pain to remember. But every time we have a pain, we are a bundle of nerves. These nerves can be offered to her. It's a way that the yoga in the physical is actually done. That one enters, the light enters into this, and all the nerves will rebel. They will say, ooh, ouch, all kinds of things. Don't use the Oli gel spray advised by the doctors. Use the divine spray. It will take time, but it is the most perfect healing. So when people depart, we should treat them with this respect, this love they deserve. They are not gone forever. They will return. But while they are in the transit, they need our help. And what help we can give? From here, the thoughts of love, thoughts of respect, not, oh, that fellow good, he has gone. Good riddance. After death, we are all that luminous beings. We are not bad creatures. Soul is always beautiful. Whatever there may have been differences, fights, quarrels, before death, please embrace the person with love, because that is the truth of a human being. And when the person departs, by all means, very important, because the soul never wanted to enter into quarrels and fights. It always comes with the dream of love. Everybody as a youngster has this dream. It's a different thing, again, Messrs. Death and Company, which will restrain, like the Tower of Babel. They will not allow. They'll create confusion because he doesn't want you to us to progress fast, rapidly. And as I said, there is a purpose. So when people depart, salutations, and know that they will come back in new bodies, new climes. The journey will continue. But while they are transiting, let us offer a love. Let us send them back. It's the last act of love that we owe towards everybody. It's the act of setting them free. We grieve not because of them. We grieve because of us. It's the value of a person in our life. But is the value limited just to the physical things or the little affection that he could give us? The real value of a person is what he aspired for, what he hoped for, what he dreamed for. However buried it was, that is the real value. And that's all we should remember. Not that moment of, oh, somebody, the people who die of very strange things. Some people take away their life. It's a tragic thing. Yet, the man is not defined by that. The man is defined by what he stood for, what he aspired for. So when we remember that, the person also goes happily on the journey because that is his secret truth. For a moment he had forgotten. Consciousness was clouded. So he did what he should not have done. But yet the truth remains. And when he has left the body and that vital sheaths, now he remembers, this is what I am, the luminous Satyavan. And so he is very happy when somebody says, yes, I know you are that. I don't label you as what everybody thought of you. It's not a tragedy. Death is never a tragedy. Death is a beginning to a greater end. So let me close with these few lines from Savitri. I was thinking I won't, but can't help it. So just a few lines and then we can have question answers. It's on page 600. All here is a mystery of contraries, darkness a magic of self-hidden light, suffering some secret rapture's tragic mask, and death an instrument of perpetual life. It goads us to live. If there was no death, we will stay in comfort zones. We face death and we take the challenge of death. That's why we forge towards the future. As I said, it's the sphinx with two faces. The future comes with the promise of change and the promise of death. We have to accept. So we can't take one. We accept the challenge of death, we take the challenge of the future. If we are afraid, then we lose. Although death walks beside us on life's road, a dim bystander at the body's start, a dim bystander at the body's start, and a last judgment on man's futile works, other is the riddle of its ambiguous face. Death is a stair, a door, a stumbling stride the soul must take to cross from birth to birth, a great defeat pregnant with victory, a whip to lash us towards a deathless state. The inconscient world is the spirit's self-made room, eternal night, shadow of eternal day. See, Sanjana and Sangyan and Chaya. Night is not our beginning nor our end. She is the dark mother in whose womb we have hid. Safe from too swift waking to world pain, we came to her from a supernal light. By light we live, and to the light we go. This is what we must remember and give send-offs to people with this hope, with this fire in the heart. This is the fire in which we must burn the dead. That fire is for the body, but there is a much greater fire. And when they burn in that fire, we add our aspiration on their journey. They know that our life has not been in vain and not a failure. It's a great defeat, pregnant with victory. Thank you. I think we'll stop here and have questions. Yeah, that's much better.
Hello, sir. I'm sorry, but if I have misunderstood any part, but I wanted to understand what is the association between death and karma.
Okay. So karma is the association between death and karma. So karma, literally, if we go back to the origin, is an energy that we release into this world. Okay. So this energy is released originally, this energy that is given to man through which it is being released. We think we are doing karma, but we are like conduits through which energy passes, goes through the system and is released into the world. So what we add to it, either a force of propulsion or a force of distortion. These are the two things which are possible. Energy comes from nature and beyond nature. That's even commonly we can see. But we let it forward. All the time this is happening in this world. So when we are aligned to light and truth and to the original will, then we give it a propulsion. And when we give it a propulsion, we grow. And when we are not aligned, so we add to it our own deformation, our own little distortion. Say for example, that there is a work which we are meant to do by a Swadharma. Arjuna is to fight a battle because he is by Swadharma is Kshatriya. Now so is Karna. But what is the difference? Arjuna fights with the dharma, flow of dharma. He's not fighting because, I want to win and rule over and crush these fellows and, make sure they become slaves. But Karna is fighting for a different purpose. So we add either from our side our consent to the workings of the will. Most of the time we are not aware, but the original, what's happening in the background. Or we add to it a distortion, we deflect it. So, depending on that, in a lifetime, nature shows us by experience that you have deflected it. And that's called the consequences of karma. We thought that, I have cheated this and I have won, and then you win everything and you lose it. Right from your hands, it escapes. Okay, so life, it's not about punishment. It teaches us that there is a deflection. So next time we do it a little better. Then the third time we do it a little better. Now, but how many times we'll do a little better in one lifetime? A lifetime is too short because the body is not yet able to progress continuously. So a time comes when the body says, you keep doing better and better, but I am poor fellow, I want to go into the dust. It's not able to take that load. So when, it's a paradox, mother puts it like this, that at 60 we learn how to live. I don't know how many are here in this age group. So, at 80 life begins. You have done all your mistakes. Now no, this is how it should be. But the body says, sorry, too late, Too late for me. So what happens? Dust. Now, in next life, you begin your journey with the essence of that experience. So karma is a evolutionary mechanism. We could go on a road up to a point, learn up to a point through experience, consequence, action and consequence. And some of the consequence we have not yet learned, so we carry over for another life. That look here, body says, I can't take all these consequences anymore. You fellow. So we quit, not quit, but there is a state of dislocation, permanent dislocation, and we leave the body, but to come back from where we had left. Something unfinished. So through karma, we grow. So karma is an evolutionary mechanism inbuilt like a software within our soul. That's why we are never satisfied with any halfway homes. Have you ever heard about karma theory applied to animals? I mean, don't go into Jataka tales, which are a way of explaining. But you'll not hear. Nobody says that, tiger will be punished because it ate a deer. Tiger, it's his law of being. But with human beings, the karma theory comes into existence. And it comes into existence because individuality, the law of choices and consequences. So because we are growing now at an individual level. Before that, there is a collective law of the species that operates. So if a species is misbehaving, nature will exterminate it. That's a different thing. So individual soul is on the journey and it grows from the state of total darkness in which it is plunged to a state of complete effulgence of truth through the release of energy till it reaches a point where everything in it is completely aligned to the original will. What is that original will? Eko ham bahushyami. Everything in us must become divine. And till that happens, in the mind one can realize it, soul can realize it, mind can realize it, heart can realize it, lower life parts take time but can realize it, the body longest. So the whole original will is that in nature, in creation, and that is why we refuse to give up. We want perfection. Ask even a person who is meeting with everything, still wants perfection. The cause for our unhappiness in life. We want perfection. But the thing is that we want perfection in others. This little change. Why doesn't the person care for me, love me, understand me perfectly? But the perfection has to be realized within me. That's the only thing. That's what the difference between yoga and, early life is. Same thing everybody is doing. So this perfection, the original replica of this perfection is above, in the law of truth. But we try to, do it, fashion it. So karma theory is basically the evolutionary mechanism. The body is destroyed, but the soul carries the imprints of essence of the experience and the unfinished curves of the future. Essence of experience, not the details. Nobody, if somebody says, oh, I remember, everybody, first of all, past life remembers that he was a king or somebody. Nobody remembers that I was a notorious gangster and a criminal in, Spain or somewhere, I meant what was those ship people who used to go into the ship and steal, pirates. Pirates may be good guys at that point of time, whatever their ideology was, but nobody remembers these things. Everybody was somebody special. That's, imagination. You don't remember the details, not necessary. It's like childhood memories. What remains of the childhood memory? People go through an heartbreak at the age of 16, 17. Nowadays it is at 10, 9, 11, whatever. Things have advanced. Even at 5, I heard somebody, it because evolution. But that time it appears life has collapsed. What happens at 45, 50, 60 when you have a child that age? And the child says, Papa, Mama, I'm going through a heartbreak. What do you say? Oh, my child, world has collapsed. You say, Arey, you will go through it and grow through it. Why? Because essence has remained. That love doesn't die. That's the essence. You would have forgotten. The same person you meet later on, you won't blame that you rejected me and you did this. Because you have outgrown. So essence is carried through the law of karma in the soul. And that is what is put forth as a seed for the future. And the unfinished curves. Unfinished curves in this example would be, in a lifetime you couldn't realize the dream of perfect love. So in next life will be, okay, fine, better understanding, better growth. That's how the law of karma continues. Yeah? Yeah.
What is the role of belief when we approach
Belief and the?
belief?
Only belief? Role of belief? Yeah. So there are two things we must differentiate. One is belief and the other is faith. So belief is a thing of the mind. Minds have belief system. Like when Sri Aurobindo says that we have a soul, I can take it as a belief and turn it into a belief system. Like, we have grown up like that there is a soul. So every time somebody dies, we play the Gita in the Indian context, and there is a soul doesn't die. But next moment, we are all the time lamenting everything. So belief doesn't, ordinarily, belief gives us a comfort, but it doesn't automatically translate into the truth of experience. But faith, on the contrary, is embedded in the soul. What we have faith in, we end up realizing, because faith is much deeper. So if I have faith that there is a soul within me, or I am the soul, I will end up one day finding a way to realize it. Doesn't matter, I may read no book at all in this whole creation. I may have never read any book in the past or present, or one that will come in the future. But if I am made up of that faith, that there is a soul within, I'll do anything, everything. Maybe while drinking water, I will say, oh, where is this soul inside? And one day I'll find the way to find it. So faith is a power which impels us to realize what we have faith in. So it is a secret knowledge. Belief is a mental construct, and it may help people, but equally it prevents us to go beyond a point, depending on the kind of belief we have. For instance, we may have belief that we are rewarded and punished by some God sitting out there. So it may prevent me from doing certain evil deeds, though I am not sure whether it's true, because most of the people who very rigidly believe in sin, they commit the worst sins upon earth. Punishment and all. They give punishment to others, all right. That you are a sinner and I'll punish you. But they continue to, massacre, ruin, rape, plunder, everything. But still, it's one. So it is meant to, belief systems are meant to help us operate within a certain framework. It gives to the mind a framework. But it also prevents us from going further. Imagine a religious belief system in which a person has grown up, and he believes that's the end of the story. So he will never go beyond when a greater truth manifests. This is one of the challenges of the mother and Sri Aurobindo, where on the one side, materialists don't know how to reject him because he speaks of divine materialism. And the religionists don't know what to do with him because he says go beyond religions. So that's where spirituality comes in. Spirituality takes us beyond belief systems to the truth of experience. So belief can be a starting point, but the perfect starting point is faith. And this is the starting point. It should translate into experience, and that requires practice. So all yoga is to translate faith into a living experience, so that I don't just believe there is a soul inside me, but I become one with that soul, so that I can say, like what Swami Ramtirth said when somebody asked him after a lecture, so Swamiji, you mean that there is a soul within your body? He says, no, I'm not saying that. He said, but you just said such a big lecture. He said, you got me wrong. I am a soul and I have a body. It's not that I have a soul. I am a soul and I have a body. It changes the perspective. And it's not a perspective change, but a fact of experience that when we know that we have a soul, not by mental knowledge, which belief system provides, but by living fact of experience, then we are freed from the sting of death. It cannot ever touch us. That's the perfect way to freedom from death, because you know it doesn't exist. I don't die. Whether I live or die, I am. So this is the difference between belief and faith. Yeah.
Alok, would you mind to give some words about your personal experience about fear? Because even though we may relate from our psychic being, death is very associated to fear, and we may pretend, okay, I am absolutely not fearing about death, but still there is some very... Could you share something which could be more personal?
Fear of death. So, fear, like everything else, can be experienced at different levels, and we have to address it at each level. So, as you rightly said that intellectually the mind may understand. We may convince the rational mind, and it is rational not to believe in death. Actually, rationally you can convince it, as the Gita starts with that if death is the end of everything, why are you worried? Logical. If it is not the end of everything, why are you worried? That's how it starts, no? Telling Arjuna that, if everything ends with death, what's the big deal? One day you will die, everybody has died, that means end of everything, so what there to think about it? But if there is something in us, as people who have gone beyond say, then why worry? So this is how the intellectual mind has to be explained. And not by a belief system, but by logical, it's a logical conclusion that if something survives in whatever way, information, consciousness, energy, doesn't matter, then what is there to worry about death? It's only something happening to a part of us. The body dies, I don't die. You can also convince the rational mind through certain experiences which have come. Like, Dr. Modi's wonderful research, then, there are some out of body experiences, near-death experiences. There was a video of Anita Murjani. So all these are good ways to make the intellectual mind understand that, look, we don't really die. Or something in us survives death. So this is one part. But intellectual understanding doesn't automatically translate into the heart. The emotions are attached. Oh, my life is not yet, over. So how to train the emotions? So emotion, that's a process. Now, intellectual mind is relatively easier. Emotions, that's a process. Because emotional natures or emotional being is attached to things of a very transient nature. It is never learned to attach to the eternal. Now, when I say attached to the eternal, there are two ways of understanding it. Love the eternal and not all these creatures in forms and name. That's the traditional way. But love the eternal in everybody. Imagine that, you love the eternal, the immortal element, the soul in your partner, in the people around you, in those who are in contact with us, whom we call as a family member. Then this love, and it's a training. That means their surface natures, the rubbings of the ego. It's not that we look. Which means that we will love in the way that if somebody gets angry, I'm giving an example. So you understand it's not the person, it's a momentary anger which has taken over. We don't cast a judgment. So when we live like that, our emotional life, then a time comes when we are ready to enter into the eternal, because the emotions don't bind us to anything which is of a transient nature. The same thing happens with the vital, low vital. When it is attached to temporary aims, living by the law of desire, then it's a tremendous pain. I mean, I've seen people at the moment of death who are thinking about their children, grandchildren. One person was so worried that when I die, my children will fight with each other. I said, why? He said, over the property. I said, let them fight, you go in peace. Can you buy your trouble? So that's why he had written a will, but not revealed. Because if I tell them now, they will start killing each other. Imagine. So again, the life of man, our life should be led in a way. A life lived well is a life which frees itself from the sting of death. And what it means is not to live for the temporary and the transient gains, but to live for the eternal. All our actions should tend towards that. That's why service of the divine is such a simple way to free ourselves from the sting of death. He will take care. We don't worry about And again, at the body, there is a fear even in the nervous system, in the very nerves, and the Upanishad describes it. What is that pain of death? There is a whole subtle nervous system behind this visible nervous system corresponding to it, which attaches us to the body, the soul to the body. It's a whole machinery and engineering. Now, if we have learned during life to separate ourselves, to detach ourselves from the phenomenal appearances, then when the time comes, we say, okay, I'm ready. Because we always knew how to unlock. There are places where you have those fire extinguishers. I'm sure everywhere people have. And I often ask, how many people know how to use it? Everybody will fumble. When there is a fire, it's no time to learn to unloose it. You will fumble. But if every day we have practiced a little bit of detachment inside and remembering the divine presence, then when the time comes to open up, or somebody is opening up the screws, we know, okay, fine, bye-bye. So this is a way we live, is itself not just a preparation for death, because death is not the final thing, but to come back, losing least. And finally, the best solution, Mother says, the mystic solution. And I have seen people like that. Mystic solution is what? Very simple. Nestle in the arms of the divine. It's given to man to pray, to be conscious of the Lord. I really feel this is the greatest blessing upon earth. Something given to us which prays. Animals can't pray. Surely they pray, but they can't express it. It's so beautiful to be able to pray to the divine, to imagine that I am in the mother's lap. Every day to think that I am held by her. It's so beautiful. What death can touch, we won't even realize. We were sleeping in her lap every day and we are carried by her through the journey of life towards that. So the best preparation is the mystic preparation. When death comes, he says, okay, we can wait. You are not the one with whom I go. And then the mother comes, as she has herself said that, my children don't go to death. This much simpler and you wait for her. When she comes, you go with her. So these are the various levels, in short, that death can be tackled. But it has to start from beginning. It can't be last minute. Sri Aurobindo was asked that it is written in the Gita that at the end of the moment of death, if you remember God, you will get moksha, liberation. He says, well, but you have to remember the other shloka that precedes it. They are two together. So what is the other one? Says, therefore, O Arjuna, remember me at all times and fight. So if one has never remembered the divine throughout life, then at the end point, okay, when I die, there is a system operating within that I can think of God. If we have not, then at the end point also we'll think of only those whom we have been attached to. So to be attached to the divine, to love the divine through everything is the simplest way. And it's such a beautiful thing. Human ego is big preventive, stands the barrier. What divine? I. So death comes as a reminder, the sphinx that waits for us beside the way. Who is this I? I'm a great doctor, don't you know it? Trained in, oh, is it? Come, I slay you. I'm a very acknowledged person, so much name and fame. I don't care, many have gone before you. But the day we are able to say in the face of death, I am mother's child, the same sphinx will change and we'll see behind the mask of terror, the mask of the luminous smile of the beloved. Yeah. So many experiences I've had of this kind. People in ashram context, even outside, but much more in ashram context, who have departed so beautifully. I remember one particular person, he had malignancy, 75. And I was told to, I'd just come and I was told to, go and see him because, he may be having a bit psychological disturbance. But he had no psychological disturbance. When I asked him, what's your problem? He said, I have a little bit of eating difficulty. He was watching nice news, 15 more days to live, all ascites and all. So I said, this is cool. First I thought that he is probably, going into denial because of training, all that you have. But this man was very interesting. Just after maybe week, 2 weeks or whatever, he landed up in the nursing home. So in the evening I asked him, everybody came to see him, his wife and others. So I asked him, people are hanging outside, so You tell me whom would you like to be near. He said, no one. I said, are you sure? He said, yes. I said, what about your wife? He said, no, I just want to be with the mother. From evening 6 o'clock, he sat bolt straight. He didn't take his meal, but sat. At 1:30, suddenly the nurse, night, feels something that let me go and see him. And at that point of time, his head rolls to one side. I have seen such deaths. You won't have even heard his name. I have also forgotten. So there are people like that whose names are not written in the annals of spiritual beings, but they are deeply spiritual. So there are deaths like that. I'm sure in Auroville context you would have seen how beautifully people go without fear. But the condition is no attachment. Or to put it other way, attach with the divine in everybody. I find it more better than attachment. Attach with the divine in everyone. So that's so beautiful. I've seen that. I've seen a dog depart like that. Literally. Very fond of me, and it become a kind of dog of everybody in that ashram area, and would go around, sit below the balcony, as if when I would do pranam, he is sitting looking up as if he's having mother's darshan. I would wonder probably he's actually seeing. And then, one day he actually, none of us could realize he was probably paralyzed or something. And then last bit before he became completely unconscious was, he was not able to move his body. We had called a vet. Ultimately the vet took him. But the last moment that I remember was, the moment I went near, he made all the effort to lift his head and looked at me with such love and tenderness. And I just went near and I just prayed to her, because I knew there is nothing much can be done, but looked at him with great fondness. Then he dropped. And of course, vet came, everything, but he had actually left the body in the ashram atmosphere. This is my own feeling. So there are beautiful, even animals know how to die well. I saw him in the dream, moving around the ashram. Yeah. Actually, quite a few. He reminded me of Dyuman Bhai's experience. Somebody, he called Dyuman Bhai, he was one of the trustees in the ashram. And he was, it seems, given the boon of Iksha Mrityu. He could choose his own time for departure. But one of the experiences that, on 17th August, he was admitted in nursing home for 2 days. He was admitted for something. And on 19th August, he departed. 19th August morning, when someone came to meet him, he told him that in the evening at 7, you do go to the Samadhi. Now, this person was departing around 8 o'clock or something. He didn't know why he is saying like that, insisting. And then he did go to the Samadhi, and, while he was there, Dyuman Bhai had left the body around 7:20 or something like that. And the best part was, on 19th August, he left the body. And when they went, because he used to keep all the ashram accounts and all, till 19th he had written. 17th he is admitted, but what a preparedness for death. That one knows that, any time I can go, any day I can go. And one is ready every day to depart. Something very beautiful that I heard about that. Number of such things, but this was exceptional. Yeah. I was reminded of a little incident, another of Mani Behan. She has departed now. So she was telling me that at 15, a young girl, she had joined the Golkund in ashram, and she was working under Monadi. So one day at around 5 o'clock, for the usual group, she started running to the group, and Monadi stopped her and said, why you are going? Have you finished the work? He said, Mother, Monadi, I have finished everything. Just a little bit is there. I'll come and do it tomorrow. She said, so Mona told her, what if the mother comes in the evening when you are not here? Your work will remain incomplete. And this was a lesson, though it looked like just an outer lesson in work, it was a huge lesson that every day, let's finish the task at hand so that there is no tomorrow to brood over and no tomorrow to lament about. To be ready any day. Yeah. Again, two little things which I am reminded of. One is about the departure time. So the departure of my physical mother, and she was having some problem. Anyways, early morning I was called. She was in the same hospital where I used to work, and she just asked the sister to call me. And I went there and I said, what's happening? She said, I'm feeling very, she used the word chatpat, I mean restless. I'm feeling very restless. So I said, what do you want? She said, I want to leave mukti. Now I don't want to live anymore. I want to leave the body. So I asked her to concentrate in the heart. Put my hand here and said, concentrate here on mother's presence. But she couldn't. After a few minutes, she said, I'm unable to. I mean, she had not practiced that way yoga, but she was like traditional, lot of mala, japa and all that. So then I put my hand over her head and I said, okay, you concentrate here. You think that mother is here and pull yourself there. And within minutes, she was gone. It's very fascinating story. And another, with regard to this dream, Chomdi, she has grown up in the ashram from the age of, I think, 3. And wonderful lady, she would, very close, like a mom almost. And every Sunday we would have dinner together. So after she left her body, then one day I suddenly see her after some time. I see that the same dinner assembly we used to meet, and Chomdi is there. So I asked her, I'm looking at her quizzically, and with a characteristic smile, she comes near me and says, you think I'm dead? And smiles. I don't know what to respond, because it's very not a good thing to say, yes, I think you are dead. And then she gives me a cherry. And I taste the cherry and I say, this is amazing, this is so tasty. Where do you get it from? And she just smiles and the whole thing vanished. Next day, look at the beauty of it. Somebody all the way comes from Australia and says, you know what? I got these cherries for you, exactly the same cherries which I had in the dream. The same taste. I remembered the taste. It was a carryover from there. And I had all my hairs standing on. I said, so the entire thing was planned much before, and she knew the cherries are coming. She picked up the cherry in the celestial world as a concrete proof. And exactly the same thing with the whole thing. So I personally believe that it will be a very good thing, which, what these sharing sessions, it'll be very nice if all these things can be somewhere documented for the future. Because this is the problem. Science wants evidence. And these are such convincing stories, not stories which have been thought about and written, but spontaneous sharings. And there are plenty of them, plenty. But that all data is lost. Why? Because we haven't, and that's what I find wonderful about the Vedas. They preserve the data. Veda is a compendium of experiences. So it's preserved down that people could refer back and say, okay, there is a possibility like that. So I believe that these stories in a world like today where, people want convincing scientific evidence, these are empirical evidence, and psychology admits them as there's a whole branch where you accept individual accounts of experiences as authentic. So it will be wonderful to have a lot of such stories, and at some point, I don't know when, you can remove names and everything, but keep them as a source material for generations to come. Plenty will be there and accumulate. You see, at one point I thought about it. I'll tell you, when I joined the ashram, because I saw 6-7 deaths of this kind, and it was so fascinating. But I got into many other things. But this idea I have been telling a lot of people. I have my own set of experiences which I wrote in the book Death, Dying, Beyond. But to make it needs a group to really dedicate to this. Like an odd story here, an odd story somewhere. That's how it will accumulate. It won't be, And it should be spontaneous, like sharing. If you start now, 10 years down the line, you'll have a Veda of, immortality and death and immortality. Share by stories. And they are authentic and genuine. I mean, they are facts of experiences. So you tell people that no, everything finishes after death. Now here is an account of the grandmother actually coming and, sharing with you. I have a number of experiences like that. And it's so wonderful. Why not? After all, that's how learning grows. Yeah. So that's why one of the things that Mother has actually advised, and it's there even in a story of one of the ashram sadhaks, that when a person departs, don't be in a hurry to disturb the room. It's like some people, okay, now he has departed, so there is a time between life and departure. So, departure is not a moment. It's a transition through days, which is recognized in, all places. So during that place, it's advisable not to disturb the surroundings, because very often something gets drawn into that atmosphere and takes rest during the journey. So it's not, sometimes even for a year, for beings who are developed, because something in them comes drawn, especially if there is a beautiful atmosphere. So comes there, stays there, and goes back. So this is how it's a very important point to, remember after departure. Not to disturb the room in which the person was staying for some time. After some time, you will feel it that now it's gone and one can make new things. Yes. So that's the beauty of these stories, that they are not just about death and afterlife, but they open doors to a new understanding. As you said, the outer mind is not aware, but something is aware which shows up in certain hints, suggestions, a dream here. So that's something very beautiful. It breaks the standard format in which we live. So it's very beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so shall we? Yeah.
Thank you, Alok, and thank you, Sushil, for recording, and Joel for audio, and thank you for all of you for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.